know what, Kenny? You are the safety consultant of the year in my eyes. We love you here on the show. A wealth of knowledge. Kenny, hey, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Rick. You're so kind. I appreciate those comments.
You know what, Kenny? I call it how I see it. And when I do that to Drive Safe Dave, he gets mad.
Yeah, because they're not nice, Kenny. when he calls it out, they're not usually as nice as those comments that he was giving to you. But, man, welcome to the show. It's so good to see you again and this year, and we are happy that you're here.
Well, thank you, Dave. Good to see y'all, too. You know, I've been your guest in the studio before, but I've never done this remote deal. So,
you know what? I know, and you're doing a good job, Kenny. I like it. You're looking sharp. Are you out on the road today?
Yes, I'm in northern Oklahoma, Ponca City, Oklahoma, helping a client. It snowed up here last night. It's cold, and this Texas boy's ready to get back home.
Oh, man, I don't know how. Yes, sir, I agree. When I see the white stuff, I just turn back around, either go home or go back south. So, hey, thank you for doing what you do. Kenny, speaking of this, I mean, when the ice comes, when the snow comes, unfortunately, with that comes accidents as well. And we've been talking about it, right, this week here. You know, the do's and the don'ts on the highway when you are involved in an accident.
Right.
And we wanted to really talk, Bob, there's some things you've been discussing.
Yeah, we've been talking all the things that we give a do and a don't each day. And Kenny, what we'd like to give the listeners out there is from the DPS side, you're a retired DPS officer, right? And
correct.
And so you've probably had your plenty share of accident scenes that you've investigated. And so what we'd like to hear from a police officer standpoint, what are some things where drivers kind of inhibit the process and put themselves in and their company in some liability situations, what they shouldn't do and what they absolutely need to do if they're involved in an accident at the scene?
Well, Bob, what I would like to do, if it's permissible with you and Rick and Dave, is structure this in such a way, and I'll respond to any questions y'all have, comments. Y'all know the three of y'all are dear friends of mine, so anything y'all want to add, feel free to do so. But I think drivers and the safety department companies need to think of post-accident activities in three regards. There's a structure. The first one is law, legal. What does the law say we have to do? Those things we're going to do. The second thing that we need to think about are what are company policies? What are things that the company says we ought to do that we're going to do? And then the third one is what are certain industry best practices? So let's start with the first one being the law. There's two bodies of law that affect trucking in general. There's federal law through the Federal Motor Carrier Safety regulations, and then obviously there's state law in whatever state you're operating in. I am unqualified to talk about state law in any state other than Texas. However, I will tell you this, most of the laws across the U.S. are pretty uniform in terms of what you should do or not do following an accident. So real quick, on the federal side, there's three primary things that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations require that a motor carrier and its drivers do following an accident. The first one is immediately following the accident, the driver should turn on their four-way flashers. If the vehicle is stopped in the main travel portion of the roadway or on a shoulder, either one, they're required within 10 minutes to put out their triangles, their emergency triangles. There's a specific ways to do that. That's really another entire discussion. And when you start talking about the number of feet and where they should be placed, and it varies whether you're on a 2-lane undivided highway, whether you're on a 4-lane divided highway, such as an interstate, if the crash occurs within a curve or at the crest of a hill, there's different ways that those triangles have to be placed. And Bob, one thing I would suggest to you and Rick and Dave, so a driver doesn't really have to remember all of that stuff, is there are some real handy diagrams that show exactly how the triangles ought to be placed. And I've seen companies do one of two things or both. They'll either buy a sticker, an adhesive sticker to actually stick on the red plastic box or the inside door of the toolbox. So if the driver opens it to get the reflectors out, tells him where to place them. Or some companies will print that diagram in color, put it in a sleeve, and then put it in the permit book so the driver has access to it. I've seen them put out every way under the sun, most of the time not correctly. But that's another entire discussion. So as soon as the crash occurs, four-way flashers and put the triangles out. The second thing, and a lot of people don't know this, it's almost common sense, but it's actually been promulgated into or codified into law as well. A motor carrier is required by federal law to cooperate with law enforcement that's doing the investigation on the accident. It's not like a criminal case where you can plead the fifth and say, I don't want to talk. You're required to cooperate with whoever has the authority to investigate that crash. That's both at the scene and oftentimes on a truck wreck, there's a follow-up investigation. The truck or trailer may be towed to a wrecker or towed to a yard somewhere. The company owns a yard. And investigators come the day after or the following day and do a post-crash inspection on the truck. But the motor carrier is required to cooperate with the investigators that are investigating that crime, that accident. The third thing, and this is one drivers are fairly familiar with, is under certain conditions, certain crashes, drivers are going to be subject to alcohol and drug testing. Now, it's important to note that you can only require a driver to submit to a DOT drug test if the crash meets the criteria for a DOT crash. And again, remember, that's any fatality or it's a crash that involves injuries requiring treatment away from the scene, or a vehicle has to be towed due to disabling damage, and the driver received a ticket related to that. That's the only way you can test somebody for DOT. Now, you can non-DOT test, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second when we get to company policy. So the three things that are required by law, the flashers and the triangles, cooperating with law enforcement, and then the third one is drug and alcohol testing. There's actually a fourth thing that really doesn't affect BCB, at least at this time, unless y'all ever become a hazmat carrier. But if a hazmat carrier is involved in a crash and there's a release of hazardous material, there's some additional reporting requirements that they have there. So that's on the federal side. Now, on the state side, and all of this is in the Texas Transportation Code, but the first requirement is that you must stay at the scene until you've met all of your legal obligations. That's simply what the law says. It says if you're involved in a crash, you'll stay at the scene until you've met your legal obligations. Well, what are those legal obligations? Well, you got to cooperate with law enforcement. You're required to identify yourself with your name, your address, the registration of your vehicle, and your insurance information to the other party. Now, there's one third thing, and maybe we need to discuss this a little more, because I think y'all are all three dads. I'm a dad. There's a trend going on right now with young people. These aren't truck drivers, but this would affect your drivers' kids that are driving. A requirement in the law is if the other party that's involved in the crash asks to see your driver's license, to physically look at your driver's license, and if your driver's license is available, meaning that it's not inside the burning truck, or it didn't get flung out on the road and you can't find it. But if the other party asks to look at it, they're allowed to visually look at your driver's license. And mainly that is to ensure that the name and address you gave them is who you really are. Now, here's the dangerous trend that young people are doing today. They're involved in crashes. They've become so comfortable with technology, they're opening up their billfold or their purse. They're taking their driver's license out. They're letting the other party take a photo with a cell phone of their actual driver's license. That is a terrible idea, and I'll tell you why. Number one, it's not required by law. But number two, if I've got a picture of your DL, and Bob, I'll just use you for an example. If I have a picture of your driver's license, there's a lot of information on there if I have nefarious goals that I can use for identity theft. Not only do I have your full name, your date of birth, your home address, but most importantly, and this is the part that young people don't realize, there is an audit number across the bottom of that driver's license. Every single one of your CDL drivers, there's a long audit number across the bottom of that. It's like 17 digits long. If you have that audit number, you can go online to Texas DPS to the driver's license section, and you can make all sorts of changes to your driver's license. So, Bob, if I had your DL, I could go online, I could log in as you, and the safeguard is that long number. If I enter that, Texas DPS thinks I'm you. And so what I could do right then, I could do a change of address. I could let them know I had lost my driver's license. And guess what? They're going to mail a DL to whatever address I put in that form. So now I'm going to actually get a physical driver's license. Now it's going to have your picture on it, but there's enough people now that have the technical savvy that can change those photos. And all of a sudden, I'm Bob Sobiak. And with that driver's license, I can go and open bank accounts. I can get credit cards. I can go get a car loan, and all of it's in your name. So this trend of young people letting people take pictures of their driver's license, that is a terrible thing to do. It seems like a smart idea. It's very convenient, but it's a bad, bad idea. So and that's something, I know how much y'all care about y'all's drivers. That's something I would like your drivers to go home and tell their kids, particularly their teenagers or grandkids that are driving, hey, don't ever let somebody take a picture of your driver's license. But back to our discussion, you are required to give that information and let them physically look at your license. You're required, Texas state law says you're required to provide aid to whatever ability you have. That's within your training, your experience, your, the scope of your ability. That doesn't mean a truck driver ought to become a brain surgeon or an orthopedic surgeon, but the main way to comply with that is if somebody's injured, call 911. I mean, you have exhibited care for the other party, and we won't get off into first aid, but if y'all ever decided to provide first aid training for your drivers, put first aid kits in the trucks, you're starting to step up that expectation of what you may or may not expect them to do on the side of the road. So those are the primary things if you're involved in a crash with another vehicle and there's a party there, okay? Now, there's a lot of times a vehicle gets hit, particularly on a parking lot, and the other person isn't there. What do you do then? You strike an unattended vehicle. You're required to make an effort to try to locate the person. So if you hit somebody at the parking lot at Walmart, there's actually an expectation to walk into Walmart and go up to a manager and say, would you page and ask, whoever's driving the pink Volkswagen out in the parking lot before these come to the front. You're supposed to make an effort to locate the person. If you can't do that, you're required to leave in a conspicuous place, and most people put it under the windshield wipers, but a piece of paper with your name, your address, a brief description of what happened, and your insurance information, so the other person can locate you if they need to. And then the other kind of crash that often occurs is a vehicle runs off the road and strikes a fixture. That could be anything from a fence, a telephone pole, a bridge abutment or whatever. And if your vehicle is not damaged to the point that you could drive away, you still have an obligation to notify the owner of whoever's property you've damaged. And you basically have got to do the same sort of thing. Try to locate that person, provide your information to where if they want to make damage claim against you, they could get in touch with your insurance agency. Now, one last thing, and this really doesn't apply to your BCB drivers because I know the character and the quality of drivers that y'all hire, but there are some extremely serious consequences for leaving the scene of an accident and not complying with those legal requirements. We call it hit and run. The common person calls it hit and run. Technically, it's fail to stop and render aid, whether that's an injury accident. And if you leave an injury accident, if you leave one that's a fatality, that's a second-degree felony. You can go to prison for 20 years, not because of what caused the crash, but by virtue of the fact you left. You can go to prison for 20 years. If a person's injured with serious bodily injury, you can go to prison for 10 years. If they have any injury, they got a cut on their finger and you leave, you can go to county jail for up to a year. If you leave a property damage accident, depending on the amount of damage, if it's over $200, that's a Class B misdemeanor. You could end up in county jail for up to 6 months. And if it's less than $200, that's a Class C misdemeanor. You could get up to a $500 fine. But the point about that is, and again, a lot of what we talk about is not only for the benefit of your drivers, but I know how conscientious y'all's drivers are, and there's a lot of information y'all share on the program that they take home and share with their families. And so this is some stuff I'd like for your drivers to make sure, particularly if they've got a youthful driver in their family, a child, a grandchild. It's a great, and it's a good segue. They can go home and say, our program this morning, we had a retired trooper came and talked, and I just want to refresh your memory about what to do if you're ever involved in a crash. It's a very natural discussion to have. So, and again, the most important thing you can do right after the crash is call 911 and get help on the way out there to help you, so you're not out there all by yourself. So those are the primary things I wanted to share about the law. And then I'd like to share some thoughts with you about company policy, but I'll pause for a second. I've been talking nonstop and ask if y'all got any questions before we move to the second topic about legal ramifications, about what somebody should or should not do there in terms of what they're required, federal or state law.
Yeah, Kenny, I had a couple, I guess maybe a question or comment on this. First comment I'm just going to make, if you're going to take a picture or get somebody's information, a driver's license, you can do a lot better than trying to be Buckle Up Bob. Let me tell you something. There's a lot better looking guys out there, Kenny. You do yourself better justice being him. But it was State Trooper Gooden just here in Texas. My daughter got into a little fender bender, nothing crazy, but she was doing exactly what you said. And he goes, no. He goes, do not take a picture of that and send that out. He didn't go into the detail that you did, but man, great information, and we will share that information to the drivers that watch us, to our office staff, because that is great information. The other thing, when it comes to an accident, we talk about some of the things that you were saying in there. What do you see with some of the companies, right? I mean, when you get into an accident, all of this stuff, we forget everything, and we may say, well, if we put a copy in their permit book, or if they type up this thing in their computer. When a driver is involved in an accident, it doesn't have to be all that serious, but they're nervous, the chaos that surrounds it. What do you see from companies, trucking companies, of better ways, or what are some of the best ways you see trucking companies get that information to their drivers at the time? How are they ready to tell the driver, hey, make sure you have this, don't take a picture of the license, to help the drivers along?
And Rick, that's a great question. It's a perfect segue in really our second topic, and that is talking about company policies. The laws are things that we don't have any choice about. We simply must comply or there's consequences. Company policy opens up a whole different ballgame. And you mentioned about what the driver does versus what's going on back at the company. And I'm going to get to, I'm going to spend a little bit of time, if y'all will permit me, on what's, in my opinion, is a very sensitive topic, and that is the traumatic impact emotionally on a truck driver that's involved in a bad crash, even if he or she is not seriously personally injured. And that has to do something with company policy. Because I want to paint a picture for just a moment. I mean, the best way for somebody to visualize something is tell a story. So I want y'all to imagine you've got a truck driver out here that's doing nothing wrong. They are minding their own business. They're at work. They're a good, conscientious driver. They're driving down the highway, and some drunk, some impaired person, somebody texting, not paying attention, runs a stop sign, runs under that trailer, and you have a catastrophic, possibly even a fatality crash. If you're in a rural part of Texas, even when you call 911, it's going to be a while before anybody gets out there. And yet that truck driver's there. That truck driver has got out of the truck. He or she has walked back there. They've seen a horror that they can't even wrap their mind around. And they're standing there on the side of the road, and their world is coming unraveled. Now, I'm going somewhere with this. I'm not just trying to be dramatic. That driver needs to know there's somebody back at the mothership. There's somebody back at the terminal. There's somebody back at the company that can instill a certain amount of stability into what, for that driver, is an extremely chaotic situation. And you ask a very interesting question. There is just as much importance on how the staff, and I'm talking about the leadership of the company, the safety department, the driver managers, the dispatchers, they need to know what to do in case of a crash, because number one, the driver may be incapacitated. He or she may not be able to do anything. You may get a call from a state trooper. Your truck's just been involved in a crash and your driver's on the way in a helicopter to a hospital. all of a sudden you are the point of contact. But even if the driver isn't injured and they're traumatized by it, you need somebody back. You don't just need somebody on the phone that says, well, hey, bud, do the best you can. That is not what that driver needs. That driver needs a support system. And the support system is not just providing emotional support, it's knowing what to do. I would encourage somebody like Bob, your safety department, to have a set of policies, a procedure manual, if you will, and that be in the hands of every single person that might be on the receiving end of that phone call, that gives them step-by-step directions. What do we do if one of our drivers calls, he's 1,000 miles from home, and he's been involved in a serious crash? So let's talk about some of the things that a company needs to consider in terms of their policies. One is a company has to make a decision about whether or not they're going to do non-DOT drug and alcohol testing. I mentioned a while ago that if a driver is required to be tested under DOT, you don't have a choice about that. But the flip side of that, because of medical and personal protection, you also cannot compel a driver to take a DOT test if he's not required to. So at that point, you may sit and say, well, we want to drug test all of our drivers to protect them after the scene, because we know our drivers aren't using illegal substances. So the only way you can do that is to have a non-DOT testing policy. So again, I'm just suggesting things that companies have to think about. The second one is, what is y'all's in-house procedure? Does the driver know who to call? What if they can't get their dispatcher? Some companies say, well, if you're involved in a crash, why don't you call the safety department? Really small motor carriers, oftentimes they want you to call the owner of the company. But the drivers need to know, if I'm involved in a crash, who am I supposed to call? And then the person receiving that call needs to know, what am I supposed to do if a driver does actually call? A big question that comes up is, who's responsible for notifying the insurance company? This is really important because oftentimes, Rick, if it's a really serious accident, you want your insurance adjuster on the scene before those vehicles are moved, before the troopers leave. And you can't do that if you wait until the next day to call the insurance company. But you got to decide who is responsible for that. Now, if you put that responsibility on a driver, hey, you've got our insurance card, it's got a 1-800 number on it, you get involved in a crash, you call the insurance company. The driver's going to sit and think, well, do I really do they want me calling and reporting this? Maybe this isn't even a reportable crash. I have no idea what our deductible is. Am I supposed to do that? A driver needs to know, am I the one supposed to call the insurance carrier, or is somebody else going to do that? And if it's somebody else, does that person know they have that responsibility? Another one is, this is still a business. Y'all operate a business. You operate a very good business, very enviable record you have as a business, but you've got customers. You got both the person that shipped that commodity and you got the person waiting to receive it. Who's going to notify them? Some companies put that onus on a truck driver. They say, hey, you were involved in a crash. Call the customer, tell them you're going to be late. Going to be late? My truck's on fire. I'm not going to be there at all. Do you really want me making that call? I'm not the guy right now that's really the best ambassador for the company. Do you want me making that call? Or are we wanting to ruin this relationship with this customer? Or would you rather somebody that's a little more level-headed do it right now? Because all I want to do right now is throw around some really ugly words. Do you want me making that call or not? Now, one other thing, and this is almost another topic in and of itself. Y'all need to have a policy about what y'all are going to do with photographs and video. Do you want your drivers taking pictures at the scene? And I'll talk more about that in just a second. And if you have, this is a biggie, if you have in-cab camera, particularly forward-facing camera, and y'all are able at the mothership, back at the terminal, you're able on your dashboard to view the video, and it totally exonerates your driver. There's a decision needs to be made right then, because I'm assuring you that other party, the idiot that ran into your truck, they're going to be saying, well, that truck driver ran into me. They're going to be making it your guy. If the video exonerates your driver, y'all need to have a policy. Are we going to offer the video to the trooper right then on the side of the road, which clears this up? Or do we always run that by our attorney first? Or are we going to make them file a subpoena and whatever? That's an in-house decision. Don't leave that up to a truck driver. Yeah, that's a business. That's a senior leadership position about, what y'all are going to do about that. Now, the last thing, and tell me if we start getting close on time, because I'm passionate about this topic. And
Kenny, we got about 7 minutes, so just so you know, we got about 7 minutes, so you're good to go.
Right. Well, I want to talk about something really important, and that is how traumatic this is for drivers. Y'all, all three of y'all know, but most of your listeners don't. I'm the son of a truck driver. My dad's already in heaven now, but I grew up in a trucking home. I've been around it my whole life. I got two little brothers that are driving as we speak. Both of them are on the road this morning. I've been around trucking my whole life. And Bob mentioned I'm a retired state trooper. I've literally been to hundreds of bad crashes. And I'm going to tell you, truck wrecks are very traumatic. Oftentimes, the truck driver is not injured. Oftentimes, the mass of the 80,000-pound truck, that mass literally protects a driver, and the other party is. And regardless of fault, the truck driver is there looking at something, seeing something with his eyes that he's never ever seen before. It's very, very traumatic. Now, we're talking about company policies. So a policy decision is, what do we have in place to help our drivers emotionally and mentally after we get them home and at the scene? That driver standing out there on the side of the road shaking, even in the middle of August when it's 105 degrees in Texas, because he's so upset, he or she, they're holding a cell phone and they're looking at a crumpled vehicle under their trailer that a teenager is inside and is clearly deceased. And these drivers are dads and moms and grandparents, and all of a sudden, all that's running through their mind. And it hurts. I'm telling you, it hurts. I'll tell y'all real quick. When I was a young state trooper, I got called to an accident scene in a very rural part of East Texas. And what had happened was there was a ready-mix cement driver that was trying to find a place where they were building a house, and he was going to pour cement for the slab. This is back in the 80s. There were no GPS. There were no cell phones. I mean, he had directions written on a Dairy Queen napkin. It said, go to the church that has the big pecan tree in the yard, turn right. When you get to the red barn, turn left. That's the kind of directions he had. And he was trying to find this place, and he ran a stop sign, and he hit a car and killed an entire family, husband, wife, and a small child. Well, I didn't know what had happened, but when I first rolled up to the scene, I see this man standing in the road directing traffic, and he had all the pose, all the action of what you think of as a city police officer directing traffic. He was holding his hand out and doing his arm like this, and then he would wave traffic. I mean, but the eerie part about it, Rick, there was no traffic. He was standing in the middle of the road directing traffic, and there was no traffic. Now, initially, that doesn't seem odd in a rural area because you often have a volunteer fireman or a local person that is trying to help, okay? I was the first police officer on the scene. There wasn't anybody else there. But the eerie part was he was directing traffic, and there was no traffic. And so I asked somebody, I said, what's that guy doing? And they said, that's the truck driver. He was in such shock by what had just occurred, he had totally zoned out. He was out there. His mind had just shut down, and he was out there directing traffic for non-existent traffic. And when I tried to talk to him, it was like talking to, and bless his heart, I mean, he just killed 3 people, and he was trying to wrap his mind around that, and his brain just said, this is too painful, I'm shutting down. And he literally was in shock. I use that as an example that sort of thing happens every single day in this country. It will happen today. There will be a truck driver somewhere, his fault, somebody else's fault, nobody's fault, that sees a horror that he never should see, and it's going to impact him in ways that we can't even fully comprehend. A company needs to decide, how are we going to take care of our drivers if and when that happens?
Hey, Kenny, I mean, wow. I mean, I can tell you right now that there's probably, you've touched a lot of hearts today, given us a lot of information. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all that you've done today. I mean, honest to God, I mean, you brought it back home, right? That, what's in the life, what's in that heart of that driver. And it doesn't have to be his or her fault. It's the fact that what they're seeing right now it's traumatic. It's creating chaos, and we in these back offices, folks, we've got to be ready to step in and help out. We have to know what to do. Kenny Ray, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Love it when you're on here. You always make a big impact. And I'm going to tell you something here. And if you're new, if you're watching this and you're looking for a home, you know what, Kenny with Marsha, a risk consultant with Marsha McLennan, this is just kind of what you guys do, right? You go out there and your job, Kenny, and give me a minute, is to make this world, to make our industry safer, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I work for an insurance company, but I don't sell insurance. Once a trucking company buys our insurance, I come along beside them. A company like y'all that has a safety department, I supplement that. If it's a small motor carrier that doesn't have a safety department, I literally become their safety department. But I work for folks like y'all, and Rick, you know this. I love the trucking industry. I'm passionate about it, unashamedly so. And I'm proud to be the son of an American truck driver. I love this industry with all my heart, and I'm always grateful when y'all ask me to be a part of the program. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Kenny, thank you so much. Hey, God bless you. Hey, we love you, Kenny. Stay safe out there on the road. Let me tell you something. There is something about that guy. I mean, there is, you can't fake that drive safe, Dave, right? What he's talking about?
Absolutely not.
I could see everything he was saying. I could feel. I was hurting, and I was hurting for that driver that's, back in the 80s, that's directing traffic that's not there, right? And he's out there doing that. And that thought goes to you, our listening audience, is, man, we've got to make sure that we are ready to support when something bad happens, because it's chaotic, it's life-changing, and we've got to be there and know what to do, not wonder what to do. We got to know at that time in the office, in that back office, in that safety department, what are we going to do? This is what we do, right?
Yes, sir.
It's how we support our drivers. It's how we make sure that everybody's going to be okay, even after something bad's happened. It's imperative. When Kenny was coming on, I said, hey, Kenny's going to tell a great story. Kenny's going to, before we even had him on here, and Kenny once again stepped up and told a great story to tell us exactly why we do what we do in safety, why it's so important that we be prepared in safety, and why it's so important that we look forward and not always try to look back.
Hey, listen, this is BCB Live. We're the safest station in the nation. We have weather coming up, we have traffic coming up, and we still have those videos coming up. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back to you in 60 seconds.